Are we ready? Okay. Well, I'm really glad everyone's listening. Welcome to the lost continent of Atlantis, a scientific expose. It's really amazing because there's such an enormous amount of material that's sort of been talked about over time, and also, lots have been sort of written about Atlantis, and it's been placed everywhere, sort of thing. And I'd love to be able to, in this show, point out where Atlantis was and what occurred during that period of time and the time frame and everything. So I can promise a really great show that we're doing on the lost continent of Atlantis. And I'm going to do everything I can to bring in more of a scientific expose. But anyway, the story really begins for lots of people with Plato, because it was really Plato who puts Atlantis into the literature. It's amazing because Plato, through Thera, may have been located on the fringes of the Atlantean Empire, but it was not to be the great island spoken of by Plato, which placed the island beyond the Pillars of Hercules out in the Straits of Gibraltar, on the way to the great continent of America that lots of people have talked about. But it definitely, if our listeners can imagine in their mind or visualize in their mind the Azores, which is out off Morocco, out into the Atlantic Ocean, we can come to the very northern tip of where Atlantis was, and it was quite a large landmass, about 1,900 miles long and about 1,000 miles or more wide, and the northern end of it was very, very tall, and all the ice from the permafrost came all the way down, and the warm Gulf Stream that used to be blocked by the island of Atlantis. Now, the Gulf Stream is a beautiful warm current that comes up from Africa and the Amazon, and it circulated in the Atlantic Ocean, and it would never really made it much past the island of Atlantis, and so the permafrost came all the way down to that latitude, and most of Europe and America, Northern America, was quite under ice at the time. But you could say that the Caribbean and the Bahamas and areas of the Caribbean there were just some islands that was the tip of the bottom of Atlantis. And it's amazing that when you look at pollen samples to discover climate change and things, we find a picture of climate having radically changed around 10,000 years ago. And what I'd like to describe is what really occurred back then. But it was Plato's uncle who had gone to Egypt and had talked to the priests there, had come back with this story that the priests in Egypt talked about this island and the people out there in the ocean, which was collapsed by the heavens, and so most everything in the literature stems from this story that Plato tells, and then since then, lots of research and things have sort of been done, and lots of books have been written, and that. And I'd like to do what I can to just to summarise a bit of some of the insights and things of Atlantis. But anyway, it is interesting that on the 8th at 8 p.m. on June 5th in 8498 BC is the time frame that the Mayan calendar begins, and it begins right then with the conjunction of three very bright stars which come into alignment. And it is interesting that the adenoids are a group of asteroids which circle the sun, and it's not in a similar sort of plane which the rest of the planets sort of spin and circle around the sun, but come in on another angle, and it's sort of really quite an oblique sort of angle, and it can be shown that one of these asteroids, which is quite a large body really, but this body was around about 8 miles in its length, and at least a couple of miles wide, was more flat and long. But that's a pretty huge body that can have penetrated the Earth. It broke up, of course, and penetrated the Earth. And it broke into a couple of pieces, but probably broke into a few more than a couple of pieces, but 2 pieces at least it broke into. And they account for the huge holes that are in the sea it's about 7 miles deep, and probably went right into the core, because it would have approached the Earth at about 15 kilometres or something per second or something, so that's pretty fast, and it would have buried itself, and it was so hot that it would have caused enormous amounts of gases to be created of the rock deep down, and caused a honeycomb like effect, and that it couldn't have landed in a more volatile area than where it did, because the continents, most of all the continents of the Earth, are around about 30 to 35 miles thick, but the Atlantic ridge line, the plate there, is much thinner, and there's a huge fault line which runs all the way from the Atlantic all the way down to South America. And all the way along that fault line, there's enormous volcanoes that have been, and they all were sort of just like rivets in a plate that can have been holding things together. But once this occurred, all hell sort of broke loose, and it took within 3 days, it can be calculated that all the way along that ridge line, it opened up, and the ridge line went all the way around the island of Atlantis, and of course it caused the island just to sink within a matter of 1 day and 1 night. Something like 60 million inhabitants perished. And of course, it would be like a little bit like having a court case after the fact of something having occurred, but having no witnesses at all. And then how could we conduct an investigation as to what really occurred back then? Well, we could certainly look at stories and things and myths of Atlantis from the people that survived both in the Atlantic and, of course, in Asia and in Africa, that were far enough away from the impact zone that they were able to survive. But of course, it radically altered and changed everything. But it's amazing to me because when a calendar begins, like the Muslim calendar, it begins with Muhammad traveling from Mecca to Medina, and that historical event is the time frame of when they begin their calendar. We begin our calendar. AD is after Christ's death, and BC is before Christ. Events in history often cause us to begin sort of some dating or counting, and our listeners might ask themselves, what could be the reason why the Mayan calendar begins on June 5th in 8,498 BC at 8 p.m. What is it that actually causes the calendar count to begin then? Though the people that created the calendar said that we were moving into a new era, and then the myths all tell of various types of suns that we've had as we looked up at the heavens, and certainly the last sun that we had was a sun which was called a watery sun, and once all that water has cleared, we have a sun which is called the sun of earthquakes, which in this era right now where we're in is a time frame more of earthquakes and things, which can be explained that the reverberations of the last asteroid and everything that hit still to this day reverberating in the earth, and also the earth has been wobbling in its circle around itself since, and all these earth changes and things have all been caused and impacted as a result of astrological events that have occurred. When we look at the moon, we can certainly see all the evidence of enormous amounts of electrical sort of shocks that have been given off the moon and asteroids that have hit the moon. Its surface is sort of fairly much sort of undisturbed, and not anything much has occurred to be able to change the evidence of our looking back at this. But the Earth is in a unique circumstance where water and wind and rain and heat and changes in temperature and things have all caused quite a bit of, and of course also we could say life as well, because bacteria, goes all the way very deep into the earth. So biology has also caused the changing of the surface of the earth to cover over a lot of the type of pockmarks that the moon has. But the earth, when you look at the globe, you can see many, many places where there's been quite large impacts that have occurred on the earth. And what sunk Atlantis was an impact from these asteroids that circle around the earth, and that it did hit on this day. It can be shown from lots of evidence, scientific evidence and things, as to that having occurred. But it's interesting that the first evidence, of course, is